Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I'm going to be going over the Unit 6B and Unit 7 review sheet. Alright, so if we look at the first one, it's asking about a average rate of change. So if we look at this average rate of change, you have to know another word for that would be slope. Okay? Alright, so I'm not going to do all of these out, but we're just going to do from the first to second hour. So if I look at the first to second hour, I have the point 140 and I have the point 110, which the corresponding x and y values match up. So if I look, slope is another word for average rate of change. Okay, so I know slope is equal to y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. It's the change in y over the change in x. So if I look at the first example, I have the slope will be 110 minus 40 all over 2 minus 1. And when you put that in the calculator, you'll get 70. Again, I'm not going to go through all 4 of these examples, but you should end up getting 70. For the second one, you'll end up getting 35. For letter C, you'll end up getting 60. And for letter D, you'll end up getting 20. And the question asks, at what time interval does it show the greatest average rate of change? So you're looking for which of these has the steepest slope, which ends up being part A, which is from the first hour to the second hour. So you'd have first hour to the second hour. Alright, so moving right along, I want to look at question number 2. Just note there was a typo on this. It should have been on the second one. Just note that there was supposed to be a 1 in there. Okay, that was forgotten about. Alright, so looking at these sequences, we have to think whether these are going to be arithmetic or geometric. So as I go from 6 to negative 12, negative 12 to 24, 24 to negative 48. Okay, if I take any term, so I'll pick the negative 48, and if I divide it by the previous term, by 24, I'll get negative 2. And if you look, all of these are being multiplied by negative 2, so that's your rate. So if I'm going to plug this in for the explicit formula for a geometric sequence, I'm going to say this is geometric, you need to know the formula a sub n is a sub 1 times r to the n minus 1. So my explicit formula, my general formula, will be a sub n equals the first term, which is 6, multiplied by the rate of negative 2 raised to the n minus 1. Okay, and now the next part asks for the value of the 12th term, so that means we know n is going to be 12, so I'm just going to plug that in. I have 6 times negative 2, all to the 12 minus 1, which is 11. And when I put that in my calculator, I get negative 12,288. Alright, so if we look at the second part, we have the sequence 9, 3, 1, a third, 1/9, etc. So again, if you pick any term, so I'll pick the 1, and if I divide it by the previous term, so I have 1 divided by 3, my ratio is 1/3. Now if I want to write the explicit formula, again, we're using our geometric sequence. This is in basic terms, so I'm going to write a sub n is going to be the first term, which is 9, multiplied by the ratio of 1/3, all raised to the n minus 1. Okay, that's your basic explicit formula. This formula here, guys, is given to you on your reference tables. Okay, that's on the reference tables. Alright, and lastly, to find the value of the 8th term, again, we know n is going to be equal to 8, so I'm just going to plug this in. To get the 8th term, I have 9 times 1/3 times 8 to the 8 minus 1, which is really to the 7th. And when you put that in the calculator, you get 1 over 243. 1 over 243, and that's if I click Math Frac. Alright, so let's move on to question number 3. So question number 3 is talking about a recursive sequence. You guys have to remember, recursive means you're using the previous term and you need to be given the first term. So the first term has to be given to you. Alright, so let's get started with this. I'm asking you to find the first 5. So the first term we know for a sub 1 is negative 1/2. You guys have to remember, and I'll highlight this over here, this a sub n minus 1 represents the previous term. That's always going to be the previous term. So if I plug this in, I know the first term is a sub 1, which is negative 1/2. To get the second term, a sub 2, I'm going to use the formula 4 times the previous term, which is negative 1/2, minus 5. And when I put that in the calculator, I end up getting negative 7. Okay, so that's my second term. To get the third term, it's the same process. I have 4 times the previous term, which is negative 7, minus 5, and I get negative 33, and this pattern continues. If I fill in for a sub 4, I'm doing 4 times whatever my previous term is, and I get negative 137. And lastly, to get a sub 5, our fifth term, I have 4 times the previous term, which is negative 137, minus 5, and you get negative 541. So these are your first 5 terms here. I'll highlight them over. Okay, now the next piece is saying it wants to know if either of these sequences are arithmetic, geometric, or if it's going to be neither. So arithmetic, you guys have to remember, there's a common difference. And in order for something to be geometric, there has to have a common ratio. Okay, those are the two differences. So if you look at each term, as I go from 1/2 to negative 7 to negative 33 to negative 137 and so forth, is there any kind of pattern? Am I multiplying by the same amount every time, or am I adding by the same amount every time? Think about it. The answer here would be neither. It's actually not arithmetic and it's not geometric, so you would say neither. There is no common difference, or common ratio. Okay. All right, I want to move on to the next question again, which deals with recursive sequences. All right, so if we take a look at question number 4, again, it's another recursive sequence. You have to know that recursive sequence means you're using the previous term and you have to be given the first term. So again, this a sub n minus 1 always means plug in the previous term. It's always going to be the previous term. And it's asking us to find the first 3 terms. So I already know the first term, a sub 1 is 2. In order for you to get the second term, I have a sub 2 is going to equal negative 2 times whatever that previous term was, which is 2. It's getting squared, I'm adding 3 to it. And when I put this in my calculator, I end up getting negative 5. In order for me to find the third term, I have negative 2 times, again, what the previous term was. That's negative 5 squared plus 3, and I end up getting negative 47. Okay, so now the question asks if this sequence is arithmetic, geometric, or neither. So if you have to look, is there a pattern? As I go from 2 to negative 5 to negative 47, is it being added by a fixed amount? Is it being multiplied by a fixed amount? Or is there no commonality between them? All right, so again, I want you to think about this question. A question like this will be on your quiz for tomorrow. All right, so if you were to look at this, there actually, again, is no common difference or common ratio. So you're going to say no common difference or common ratio. Sorry, I'm writing with this with my finger. I left my stylus at home. So this is going to be neither again. All right, I want to look now at question number 5, which is asking us to solve a system of equations. All right, so when we solve systems of equations, we have to solve for both x and y. Now, first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get y by itself for the second equation. So for the second equation, I'm going to subtract the 2x on both sides. I'll have 2y equals negative 2x plus 12. Divide both sides by 2. And I'll get y equals negative x plus 6. So now notice, I have both of these things equal to y. Because both of these things are equal to y, I can use substitution and just substitute this in. So because this whole thing equals y, I'm going to move that in right there. So now I have negative x plus 6 equals x squared minus 2x. Now, guys, you got to remember, what kind of function do I now have? What is this? I have negative x plus 6 equals x squared minus 2x. You have to remember x squared is a quadratic function. And how do we solve quadratics? By setting them equal to 0. So I'm going to start by setting this equation equal to 0. So I'm going to bring over the x by adding x to both sides. So now I have 6 equals x squared minus x. I'm going to subtract the 6 over, subtract over the 6, and now I have 0 equals x squared minus x minus 6. Okay, and I'm just going to clean this up a little bit before we start to solve this by using either quadratic formula, by using completing the square, or you can also factor by grouping using our master product. Alright, so if I use the master product for this, I have negative 6x squared. And now you have to think, what are two numbers that multiply to negative 6x squared but adds to negative x? So I have negative 3x and positive 2x. Is that actually going to work? Let's see. Negative 3 times positive 2 is negative 6. When I add those two things together, I do get negative 1, so that works out. So now I can split the middle. I have x squared plus 2x minus 3x minus 6 equals 0. I'm going to factor out the GCF from the first two, which they both share an x, and I'm left with x plus 2. And then I'm going to factor out a negative 3 from the second two terms, and I'll be left with, again, the x plus 2 in the middle. These things, reminder, have to match. If they don't match, you did something wrong. And I'll highlight in blue what's left over. So when I write this out, I have x minus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0. When I solve for x, I'll get x equals 3 and x equals negative 2. Now we're not done. It's asking you to solve a system. So by solving the system, you have to find both x and y. You need both. If you forget to solve for y, it's not correct. Alright, so now let's substitute back in. I'm going to use the top equation here. So when x is 3, if I plug that in for the top one, I will get y equals 3. Okay, and then when I plug in x to be negative 2 for the top equation, I get y to be 8. Okay, so this is by solving a system of equations, which will be on your quiz for tomorrow. Alright, I want to move on ahead to question number 6. Alright, so question number 6 is just asking you to graph a function, so this shouldn't be too bad. You guys should just put this right into your calculators. So I'm just going to pause the video for a moment, graph the points, and you should compare yours to mine. Alright, so that's what your graph should look like. It's a square root function. It's shifted to the left by 1 unit and shifted down by 6 units. So that's actually answering part C. So I'll just fill that out here then. We have shift left 1, and this is going down by 6. Again, the parent function would be a square root function right there. Alright, so now we got to talk about domain and range. So if you look at the graph, the smallest possible value for x would be when x is negative 1. So I'm looking at all values that are going to be greater than or equal to negative 1. If I look at the range, the smallest y value, if I look here, the smallest y value is at negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at negative 6. So my y values will be greater than or equal to negative 6. And the last part asks, does this function have any zeros? So you have to remember, to find the zeros of a function, we set y equal to 0, and we find what the x values are. So if we look, when would y equal 0? Look at this function. I have 0 would equal square root of x plus 1 minus 6. So if x were to equal 35, okay, if x were to equal 35, if I do 35 plus 1, the square root of 35 plus 1 is the square root of 36, and you guys know that the square root of 36 is just 6. So if I take the square root of 36 and subtract it from 6, I get 6 minus 6 equals 0. So therefore you actually do have a 0 at x equals 35. Alright, so I want to move it right along to question number 7. Again, you guys need to know the difference between your functions when I'm referring to the parent functions. Alright, so if you look at question number 7, it asks what kind of function this is. So because this thing is being squared, this is a quadratic. Okay, if I look at the second one, letter B, this is a square root function. Square root. Please be careful, a lot of you guys are confusing the two. A quadratic has a squared in it, and then a square root has the radical symbol. Okay, and then for letter C, that's our absolute value function. Alright, but the question asks for you to also identify the kind of transformation from the parent function. So let's go through this. So for part A, we know that this is quadratic. If I were to compare that to the parent function, this was shifted to the right by 4 and up by 5. Again, we always take what's opposite of the sign inside the parentheses. Okay, so if I look at letter B, this thing is being shifted left by 7. And lastly, if I look at letter C, that's being shifted to the right by 6 and down by 7. Okay, so you just guys have to remember when you're talking about transformations, when I look at what's inside the parentheses, absolute value bars, or whatever's underneath the square root, you're always going to take the opposite sign of that, and it's determining whether it's going to be shifted left or right. And then whatever's outside of that, whether it's plus 5, minus 5, that's going to be dealing with something going up and down. Alright, so I want to look at number 8. This is dealing with a linear system of equations. So you guys have to remember to solve a system. When you see solve system of equations, and notice that the S is plural, you need to have more than one equation. You have to know to use either substitution or elimination if it's asking for it also to be done algebraically. Okay, so we're going to go through that. Alright, so if you read the question, it's talking about Best Buy selling DVDs and CDs. And I realize probably none of you even use CDs. But anyways, we have Jane was able to buy 4 DVDs and 2 CDs for $46. We have Larry bought 3 DVDs and 1 CD for $28. And it asks you to write a system and then solve it as well. Okay, so we have to come up with variables for the unknowns. So I don't know how much a DVD costs, so I'm going to call that X. So I'll say let X equal the cost of a DVD. And I don't know what the cost of a CD is, so I'll say let Y equal the cost of a CD. Again, guys, don't lose points because you forgot to write your let statement. Alright, so let me start by writing out my system. So we have our let statement, check. That's going to get you a point. The next piece says Jane was able to buy 4 DVDs and 2 CDs, all for $46. So that's our one equation. Next we have to deal with Larry. So Larry bought 3 DVDs and 1 CD, all for $28. Now that we have our system set up, we have to solve it. I'm going to go through solving it by using elimination just because I prefer it. I'm going to clean this up a little bit and erase the information I have up here just so that I have some more space. But again, don't forget your let statement. Okay, so to solve this by elimination, I'm going to try to cancel y. So in order for me to cancel y, I'm going to multiply the bottom equation by -2. Because if I multiply it by -2, the y's are going to cancel. So let me show you. You have 4x plus 2y, that's the top equation, that stays the same. And I'm going to distribute that -2 to each term. So I'll have -6x minus 2y equals -56. Okay, so when I add these vertically, if you notice, the y's are going to cancel. So I have negative 2x equals negative 10. When I solve for x by dividing by negative 2, I get x equals 5. So I know that the cost of one DVD, because as we said previously in our let statement, we let x be the cost of DVDs. We know one DVD costs $5. Now you need to figure out what the cost of one CD is. So guys, all you got to do is just pick an equation and plug back into it. So again, I'm just going to erase this to clean it up a bit, and we'll plug into either the top or the bottom. I ended up just plugging back into the top equation just because I thought it would be easier. Alright, so if I plug x into the top equation, I have 4 times 5 plus 2y equals 46. And if I subtract 20 on both sides, because 4 times 5 is 20, I have 2y equals 26. When you divide both sides by 2, you'll get y equals 13. So now you know that the cost for one CD costs $13. Okay, so this is how you would solve a system algebraically by using elimination. Alright, we're getting close to the end here. Let's take a look at question number 9. Okay, question number 9 is talking about a recursive formula that would represent the number of squares in the sequence. Now, you have to remember, again, that the word recursive means that you need the previous, you're going to be using the previous term and you need the first term. So immediately you should be crossing off answer choices 1 and 2 because they don't include a first term. So now if I look at the sequence, I know that the first term, my a sub 1, is going to be 3. Okay, and every term is going up by 2's. So if I already just look at my answer choices, guys, not even too much work here involved. A sub 1 we know has to be 3 because that's the first term. I don't even need to do much more because 1 and 2 were ruled out because that's just a line and we need a recursive formula. And answer choice 4 says the first term is 1 block, and that's not true. There's 3. So I'm just going to stop there. I know that my answer has to be 3. Alright, moving on. We are almost done here. We've got 10, 11, and 12, and you guys will be good to go. So let's look at question number 10. Okay, so question number 10 is talking about a car that has its value being decreased by 14% each year, and it wants you to write a function f of t. So again, you got to make sure you're using t for the variable, not x. So if I write f of t, we know that the initial amount is 25,998, and this is the decay. We're talking about a decrease. So you have to remember that 14% has to be changed into a decimal. So that means r is going to equal 0.14. You got to change it from a percent to a decimal. Okay, and because we're talking about a decay, we're going to be using 1 minus 0.14 to the t. And it's asking you to use that function that you created to find the amount after 5 years. So I'm just going to plug in t to be 5. So when I plug in t to be 5, I end up getting, let's see, $12,230.16. And it says again for now part B, using the function determine the value of the car after 6 years. So now I'm going to plug in t to be 6. So I have 25,998 times 1 minus 0.14 to the 6th. And I end up getting $10,517.94. And it asks you to find the difference in value, so I'm just going to subtract those. When I subtract these two numbers, so when I subtract this and this, okay, when I subtract those together, I end up getting $1,712.22. Okay? Alright, so moving right along, you will have a question just like this on your quiz tomorrow. You got to make sure that you know when it's talking about a decay that the number will be less than 1, and when I'm talking about a growth, the number will be greater than 1 inside the parentheses. Alright, so let's look at question number 11, and we are almost good to go. Alright, so for letter A, because the number inside the parentheses is greater than 1, we're looking at a growth And how much of a growth is this? Well, how much greater than 1 is this? It's greater than 1 by 0.2. That's the rate. If I want that written as a percentage, I've got to move the decimal over twice, which leaves me at 20% growth. If I look at letter B, okay, and look at the number inside the parentheses is less than 1. And how much less than 1 is this? Well, 1 minus 0.98 is 0.02. So the rate is 0.02, and if I were to write this as a percentage, that's a 2% decay. Okay, very quickly moving along, if I look at letter C, that number is greater than 1. How much greater than 1 is it by? 0.007. That's the rate of growth. If I want to write this as a percentage, I've got to move the decimal over twice, which means I have a 0.7% growth. All right, very quickly, I want to move to question number 12, and you guys will be all set and ready to go for tomorrow. So question 12 is just asking us to find the y-intercepts for the graphs. So you guys have to remember when you're finding the y-intercepts, that means x is going to equal 0. Okay, so if you look at letter A, the first one over here for f of x, you got to remember that we're plugging in x to be 0 because we're trying to figure out what the y-intercept is. So when x is equal to 0, when I plug this into my function, I'll get y equaling 8. Just looking at my table here for g of x, when x is equal to 0, my y value is -5. And then lastly, if I look at h of x, when x is equal to 0, y is also equal to 0. So if this asks you to rate them from least to greatest, you would have h of x, then g of x, and then lastly f of x. Alright, so this kind of wraps up our video. I hope you guys found this helpful, and I wish you the best of luck on your quiz tomorrow. If you have any questions, you guys can just message me on the Remind app. Have a good night.